Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Thursday, the 18th of July in London. I'm Caroline Hepker. Coming up today, Biden faces intensifying calls to step aside while ill with COVID, as Republican VP pick JD Vance says the party is done catering to Wall Street. Keir Starmer looks to mend Britain's relationship with the EU as he hosts more than 40 leaders today. Plus, make no bones about it, it's a big purchase. Citadel founder Ken Griffin buys a nearly complete Stegosaurus skeleton for close to $45 million. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Joe Biden is facing more pressure from his party to drop out of the presidential race. Democrat Senator leader Chuck Schumer reportedly told the president last week it would be best if he ended his re-election bid. This, according to ABC News. Another senior Democrat, Adam Schiff, was caught at a fundraiser saying that Biden needed to pass the torch.
I do not think he is the best person to go into this election. I think if he is our nominee, I think we lose.
California Representative Adam Schiff there. With public and private concerns in the party mounting, Biden also tested positive for COVID overnight. While symptoms are mild, the diagnosis removes him from the campaign trail and thrusts his health back into the spotlight. The diagnosis comes after he told an interviewer that he is willing to relinquish power to Kamala Harris if he wins a second term but is unable to complete it for health reasons. Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate, JD Vance, has made his keynote acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention. In a populist pitch that doubled down on Donald Trump's America First narrative, the Ohio senator drew on his upbringing to blame Biden for presiding over an economy that he says has left behind many working-class families. And in a speech crafted to appeal to blue-collar swing state workers, Vance also went after the finance industry.
We're done, ladies and gentlemen, catering to Wall Street. We'll commit to the working man. We're done importing foreign labor. We're going to fight for American citizens and their good jobs and their good wages. We're done buying energy from countries that hate us. We're going to get it right here from American workers in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, and across the country. We're done sacrificing supply chains to unlimited global trade, and we're going to stamp more and more products with that beautiful label, made in the USA.
The Biden campaign responded to Vance's speech by calling him unprepared, unqualified, and willing to do anything Donald Trump demands. Vance's foreign policy stance also raises questions for Europe as leaders gather in the UK for a key summit. The VP nominee has opposed US military support of Ukraine and in his speech last night doubled down on a tough stance towards America's military allies.
Together, we will make sure our allies share in the burden of securing world peace. No more free rides for nations that betray the generosity of the American taxpayer.
Vance's rhetoric is likely to be a hot topic here in Britain as Prime Minister Keir Starmer hosts the European political community gathering of more than 40 leaders. The meeting will include discussions about defence and the threat from Russia, illegal immigration and energy security, while the new UK Prime Minister is also hoping to use the gathering as a chance to reset Britain's relationship with the EU. Keir Starmer also set out his agenda in an ambitious King's Speech. The traditional opening of Parliament yesterday saw the setting out of 39 planned new bills, one of the largest to-do lists in the past 30 years of UK government. The Prime Minister says that they need to get on with the serious business of government.
This government has been elected to deliver nothing less than national renewal, to stop the chaos of the past 14 years, turn the page on an era of politics as noisy performance, and return it to public service.
The speech comes as Starmer ended his second week in power. His administration has so far been marked by a desire to be seen as highly proactive. Now, the European Central Bank is unlikely to cut interest rates at their meeting later today, but the ECB President Christine Lagarde may hint at a cut in September. Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden has more from Frankfurt.
With Eurozone growth losing steam, but services inflation sticky, markets and economists expect the European Central Bank to keep interest rates on hold at its July meeting today, though traders will listen closely for clues as to whether a September move is coming. Even the hawkish end of the Governing Council has said market pricing for 2 more moves this year looks reasonable. But President Christine Lagarde is unlikely to want to box herself in on timing, so will probably reiterate that the central bank is data dependent. A key question is whether she reintroduces the ECB's easing bias. In Frankfurt, Lizzie Burden, Bloomberg Radio.
Meanwhile, Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller says that the central bank is nearing its moment to cut rates. He told an audience in Kansas the US may have managed to tame inflation without dipping into a recession.
I believe the current data are consistent with achieving a soft landing. And I'll be looking for data over the next couple of months to buttress that view. So while I don't believe we have reached our final destination, I do believe we are getting closer to the time when a cut in the policy rate is warranted.
Waller's comments echo a number of other policymakers who are broadly optimistic about the direction of inflation but want more data. Investors are betting that they will pause in July, leaving rate reductions until the Fed's September gathering. And lastly, old bones. The Citadel founder Ken Griffin has paid Sotheby's $44.6 million for an almost complete Stegosaurus fossil, a record sum at auction. The 150-million-year-old dinosaur, nicknamed Apex, is more than 3 metres tall and more than 8 metres long. It's understood that Griffin's plan is to put it on display at a US museum. Now, in a moment, analysis of JD Vance's speech to Republicans as he accepted the nomination to run alongside Donald Trump, and also the European Political Community meeting in the UK at Blenheim Palace. Our reporter Ollie Crook is there, so we'll be going there live in a moment. But first, this is a Bloomberg reporter after my own heart. This is Conrad Quilty Harper's piece out today. He's writing about a senior fellow at Wharton School called Matthew Killingsworth, who disputes the idea that the link between well-being and wealth levels off once you earn a certain amount of money. This, of course, is known as the happiness plateau. It was also part of the paper in 2010 from the economists Angus Deaton and Daniel Kahneman. They were talking about how happiness tends to go up with incomes, but only until you get a certain amount of a cushion, let's say, until $60,000 to $90,000 in income per year. And then it sort of flattens out. Matthew Killingsworth, who studies the causes of human happiness, says that actually both millionaires and billionaires are significantly happier than people who earn more than $500,000 a year. Huge sums, but a really interesting study. And Bloomberg reporter Conrad Quilty Harper has got that piece on the terminal for you to have a look at this morning. Perhaps some inspiration for you. Now, let's turn our attention then to the big news that came out overnight. JD Vance accepted the Republican nomination for vice president at the Republican National Convention tonight in a US presidential race that has taken some big twists and turns, whilst President Joe Biden is grasping to stabilise his own campaign. Joining me now is Bloomberg's Washington editor, John Harney, who's obviously been watching what happened at the RNC overnight. John, great to have you with us. Good morning. JD Vance has been a senator for only about 18 months. I was watching some of the speech. He was cracking jokes. He was ad-libbing. What did this speech show about Trump's VP pick?
Well, it shows immediately that he's a deft, quick-thinking politician who comes across as smart but modest, determined but genial, very, very opinionated but not angry. And he'll say things, not so much tonight, but offer positions that some people in the audience may vehemently disagree with. But he does so with a good bit of charm. But again, some of the stuff he said about Wall Street probably didn't go over too well with some in the convention audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it's a friendly audience at the RNC. He was introduced also by his wife, which I thought was, is typical but interesting. On policy, John, what do you take away from this? Vance was appealing clearly to blue-collar workers. He's anti-China. You mentioned the Wall Street comments. What emerged in terms of his policy thinking?
He draws a bit on his biography. Of course, he rose to prominence and celebrity as the author of Hillbilly Elegy about his very humble and difficult upbringing in Ohio as part of a culture where the white working class had been deprived of jobs and had been left behind by, as he put it, elites. In some ways, he sort of evokes earlier populists like, say, William Jennings Bryan in the late 19th and early 20th century, who railed against the East Coast financiers who had sold out the farmers in the Midwest. Of course, the times are much different now, but it carries some of the same message.
Okay, that's interesting. Meanwhile, Joe Biden has COVID now. He's curtailing his campaign. He seems to be struggling to steady his campaign.
Well, I mean, it's almost sort of a split screen on Wednesday night as the convention began its third session. And first we heard that President Biden had the coronavirus, tested positive for it. And then came all these reports and leaks that Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, the Minority Leader of the U.S. House, and Nancy Pelosi, who had been one of the most powerful House speakers of our lifetimes, had all in private strongly, told the president that he was not likely to win the election, and that would affect the fortunes of Democratic candidates in Congress.
Yeah, and so we will watch that story also. John, thank you so much for being with me this morning. Bloomberg's Washington editor, John Harney, always great to have you on the programme, your insights into, well, the RNC, but also what's happening with the Biden campaign. I mean, meanwhile, here in the UK, of course, our own Prime Minister Keir Starmer is hosting his first major international gathering since becoming PM. His government's legislative agenda was set out yesterday in the King's Speech in Parliament. Bloomberg's reporter Oliver Crook joins me now, though, from the European Political Community meeting at Blenheim Palace. This is Winston Churchill's ancestral home, and this is where all of these European leaders, EU and non-EU leaders, will be gathering. Ollie, good morning. The EPC is being billed as a chance for Starmer to reset the UK's relationship with the continent. I mean, firstly, on that aim, what are they trying to do?
Yeah, that's right, Caroline. I mean, listen, this is a format that was born after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it was sort of, the brainchild of Emmanuel Macron. And the idea is to draw a wider tent across Europe in a time when really there needs to be more collective action. There needs to be more working together across Europe to deal with these large threats like Russia. And this is the first global event for Keir Starmer. He's pulling together almost 50 heads of states. So you have to imagine how significant this is for him, where he's not only meeting all these people, but he's playing host, just weeks after coming into power. These are kinds of meetings that would take, months and months and months to arrange. So this is hugely politically valuable for him. And really what he has said from the beginning is he wants to redefine this relationship with Europe. He thinks that there's actually a better deal out there between the UK and Europe. The question is, what does that relationship look like? And flowing from that is, what will Europe allow? They have said in the past they do not want to allow any cherry picking. Of course, Brexit still needs to hurt the UK from the European perspective to a certain degree. But there's also a question of what Starmer has a mandate to do. Have British views changed since 2015 in terms of what the relationship with Europe could be going forward? The concrete proposal that they're hoping to get here is some kind of security pact, though we are, don't have the details on that, though we'll be speaking to a number of people here to try to get that out throughout the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, on security, the US election, the Trump-Vance ticket looms large. How is Europe dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, that adds all the urgency to this, right? There's obviously the question of Russia. It becomes much more present when you have a candidate at the potentially in the United States that is, really sort of shown his strength over the last couple of weeks. That is sort of defiant and doesn't really necessarily believe in NATO. And as we heard from JD Vance last night, saying that basically the U.S. is going to make its allies pay for their support. It's not coming for free anymore. And he really believes, and so does Donald Trump, that these countries, particularly in Europe, have been taking advantage of the United States for the security guarantees. This is important here for the UK in trying to strike a deal with the EU, because the EU is putting a lot of money towards defense. They're trying to put a lot of programs together where it's not just buying more and ramping up defense spending, it's spending it with within Europe. So here it'll be important to try to strike those relationships and that conversation so that money potentially is not just spent on the continent, it's spent within the United Kingdom. So hugely, influential there and important there. We should also say there's also going to be some conversations around migration. Maloney is going to be heading that conversation. It'll be really interesting to see how Keir Starmer and Giorgia Meloni get along. And of course, there are a couple other issues, energy, Norway's involved here, but it's also, speaking to Turkey. So really bring all of these countries together here in Buckingham Palace today.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.